a minute or two ago.
So Andrew, the links have changed, and I don't know if that's causing some folks to join the old link.
I don't know. John just said he's coming on now, so he'll let me know if he's got a problem.
I
think
have
he was
joined
in another meeting that overran.
Oh, okay. Because I joined the latest link.
I followed the link through from the data tracker through the interim meetings.
Can we send out an email saying follow the data tracker?
Yeah, I can give you the exact page that, hold on a sec. I'll put it in the chat.
No, that's okay. Okay. Go ahead.
Yeah, the link that I've just put into the chat contains the remote instructions link works there.
So I think Jeff has joined old meeting link, so we should probably give a minute.
Yeah, I thought we'd give 5 minutes.
While we're waiting, can I check if my audio is okay?
It's coming. Can hear you.
Your audio is great, John. A little bit louder.
Sorry, a little bit louder, did you say?
A little bit louder. Yep.
If you need me
John,
louder, I will put on the headset.
No, John, you're coming out okay, at least on the California side.
I think I'm speaking loudly enough to be heard from California without any electronics.
Then go ahead.
Thank you.
I know you've got a tight time frame, John, so it looks like we've got most of it. I'll start the meeting, and it looks like we're recording. Good morning. This is an interim. This is September 25th. We're hoping that other people will join us. I'm going to go through the chair slides. The first is the note well. Please make sure you read it. If you've not read it, it's on the slides if you'd like a longer look at it. But this ITF, when you participate, it implies you agree the processes, ITF processes and policies. If you are aware of any ITF contribution that's covered by patent or patent applications, owned or controlled by you or your sponsor, you must disclose it and not participate in the discussion. If we're in the middle of, I'm talking into cotton. Okay. Just a minute, folks. How's this, John? Better? Or still cotton?
You're still not terribly clear, Sue?
How about now? Better?
There's a question to me. What are we looking for?
It was to me, told Sue that her voice is not sounding very clear. Sue, I think your microphone is possibly pointing to something else than you think it is.
Yeah, I think it is. I'll readjust during John's slides. How bad is it? Can I get through the introduction?
You are understandable. You know, you can switch later.
Okay, I'll come out. I'll go out while John's talking. Sorry, John. Let me just mention that, like me, you need to make sure your audio and video is working. Use a headset, which I'm using, but apparently not really. Here is the agenda. The agenda bashing is we'll probably run through the whole time. John's going to give us a discussion about the entropy 11. We're going to do that before a second working group last call. And Kara and Jeff, I will ask you to take notes while I disappear. John, I believe, Jeff, can you monitor John's call and start John's presentation for me? And hand it to John. Okay, I'll be back.
So is one of the chairs going to fire up the slides for me?
Yeah, I'll fire up the slides. Hold on.
Or shall I can ask to share a thing also?
Okay. Okay. Nope.
I can try this ask to share slides clicky thingy. I just don't want to cross the beams.
Okay. I've granted you preloaded permission.
Wait.
See if that works.
Yep. Let's see.
I think it might be that you're still sharing slides because I said it said that you were sharing something, but I think I'm still
Oh,
seeing slides.
I got it. Just took a minute to load on my side, I think. Oh no. Never mind.
It looks like you're on sharing slides.
Sue,
Yeah,
you need
so-
to share slides. There you go.
Okay, shall I hit this ask to share slides thing again, or is one of you going to pop them up?
Try now, please.
Try now. Okay. Ask to share slides. Thank you. There we go.
You're welcome. Okay. I will be back to see if I can improve. How is it doing?
Oh, that's working.
Cool.
Okay.
All right. Good day, everybody. So we had a working group last call on this draft. And Sue asked me to give a roll-up of what happened during the working group last call. We had some fairly significant reviews come in after the end of the working group last call, which thank you very much for those. I would much rather have a late review than no review. So just ever so briefly, to set the stage, I don't want to give a tutorial on this yet again. We've done it enough times, but the attribute that we're talking about is intended to inform downstream, upstream, depending on what you're thinking about the direction of routing advertisement or the direction of forwarding routers about forwarding plain features. We tag it with the next hop of the last router that touched the next hop of the underlying route. And the reason is basically so that the receiver can know that that the forwarding path is actually what the attribute says it is. And finally, there's this TLB called ELCv3, entropy label capability. It's defined to be carried in there. It's an idempotent dataless attribute that just says the egress can support entropy label processing. So we had a bunch of issues raised and resolved. So I'll speed through these. I'm hoping that we have a little time at the end for discussing things that I think are actually open questions. So I'm going to try to go through these fairly quickly. The title was misleading. We changed the title. The file name was misleading. I'm sorry, the file name is still misleading. It seemed worse to change it than to keep it the same, and there was no real consensus in the discussion for one way or the other. Section 2.3 was too insistent that you must not influence IBGP route selection, and the resolution on that was to say, you know, as usual in BGP, you're allowed to do anything you want if you're a consenting adult and your configuration says that you know what you're doing. There was an issue that the message in, or the language in section 2.4 about message malformation was sloppy, and yes, it was sloppy. Thank you for the improved language. There was a desire for a private use range. Resolution was, sure, why not? And then we also put in some new explanatory text to try to clear up things that seemed to trip people up during the working group last call, even if it wasn't specifically requested, and that got published as version 10. In version 10, there was I think Jan brought up a concern about that saying address family is imprecise or inaccurate. And in version 11, we use NLRI instead. So now here are things that are not necessarily resolved. So Robert brought up the question of, you know, why do we even need ELCV3? We can, you know, MNH can do everything. My answer to that anyway is we got to get this done. People actually need this thing in their networks. So actually, because this is an open question, I'll pause here to see if anyone wants to discuss that. Or maybe I'll keep going, but I'll point out that this is a, you know, point that's open for discussion. But my proposed resolution is, you know, your point's noted, but I think that we need to have a solution that is able to be deployed now. Then we had a long review from Ketan. Thank you very much for that. I think most of it we've already closed in email. So he points out that the labeled NLRI language introduced in 10 is still imprecise, and like, fine, we'll work on a rewrite. It's still pending, but I don't think we'll have trouble closing on that. There's a section in 2.1 that's kind of introductory material about potentially useful material, or information, et cetera, and Ketan has sent text for that. So, you know, this all happened over the weekend, so forgive me that it's not all fully integrated yet, but it looked reasonable. There's language in section 2.1 about language that says that the next hop in the header identifies the router, and we basically agreed that, you know, even though it's not fully precise, it's okay. He pointed out that the term binary integers is kind of weird in the spec, and so it is. That will be gone in version 12. The send language about when you should send the attribute is imprecise. Fair enough, we'll use propagate. The accept language is imprecise, and again, Ketan sent text, and I want a little time to look it over, but it looked fine. Do we need to do then? Okay, so this one is a little less easily taken care of. So about non-selected routes, do we need to do anything? So for non-multipath routes, we agreed text as written is just fine. But then Ketan said, what about multipath routes? And I said, oh snap. Multipath routes are just gnarly. And as far as I can tell, in our document set, we've never actually standardized what the heck to do about multipath routes. But basically, as far as I'm aware, everybody who implements something with BGP multipath does so using some flavor of aggregation, and kind of logically that's what multipath is anyway. And I see that Ketan has a comment. Please go ahead, as far as I'm concerned.
Can you hear me? John, please
Yes.
go ahead. I just wanted to chime in after you're done on this point.
Okay, I basically was done. I guess I'll just say a few more words, which is, and you can leave your mic on so that you don't have to wait for the delay while the stream establishes. Yeah, about the multipath, I guess we need some aggregation language in there, and because aggregation is tricky and vexing, and I want to take some time to do it right. I'm perfectly happy to, overjoyed, in fact, to accept contributions if anybody has ideas about how we should spec it. Otherwise, I'll hopefully find some time later this week to work on it. That's what I've got to say. Ketan, please go.
Yeah, so I just wanted to say that if the router is programming multipath, and if one of those path is not does not carry or is not EL capable or does not carry that indication, then basically what you said in the email, we should have the text must not propagate the ELC v3 further. So I mean that would be the obvious thing, but also indication for further or new or NHC capabilities to cover this aspect. So that I think that should address this comment.
Cool. Yeah, like I said, I think we pretty much agree on what should happen. It's just that the text is tricky enough that I didn't want to try to write it on a Sunday evening.
Agree.
So hopefully we'll take care of that fairly straightforwardly. Then let's see. Moving along with your review. Yeah, I proposed a new language for how to handle multiple instances, which is basically it's idempotent, so just ignore the first, anything after the first. There's a difficult compound sentence. I agree that was difficult. Thank you for the proposed language. So then, yeah, this could be a longer or a shorter conversation. I think it's likely to be shorter, in part because of some of the unicast email I've gotten. So the issue that Ketan brought up is that Appendix A is problematic, and I'll just quote him. The issue with this appendix getting into an RFC is that vendors may be asked to implement this transition mechanism, and that flies against what I believe was a consensus to simply deprecate and discard attribute 28. So I agree that was the consensus. My counterpoint is that, yes, exactly, vendors may be asked to implement a transition mechanism, and I believe that will, happen regardless of what we say or don't say in an RFC. So I think that it's a service to the community to say, if you're asked to implement it, here's some hints about how to do so. Now, I will add that, it seems like I'm in the rough on that. But I want to make sure the working group has been, polled on this, because anyway, the options are either we keep the appendix as written, which is kind of my preference, but like I said, I think I may be in the rough on this point, or we can remove the appendix and add this this other bullet that I proposed in the email. I'm pretty close to calling myself in the rough. I think it's a mistake, but not a huge mistake. So, big deal. Let's not let this hold us up, and let's move on. I see Kayor with his hand raised. Go ahead, please.
Can you hear me, John?
I hear you.
Yeah, I had a quick question about Appendix A itself. Is your preference to keep this as it goes through an RFC, or would you rather see it removed at some point? What are you thinking?
My personal preference is that I like it with the appendix because I think that it's potentially helpful to an implementer, you know, when their customer comes along and says, hey, Kior, or, you know, hey, you know, Joe Blogs, I want you to implement a transition mechanism. You know, that having been said, I have heard from several people unicast that they would prefer to remove it. And if that's the working group consensus, then so be it. Let's remove it. The spec works either way. You know, it doesn't change anything normatively one way or the other, whether we have that appendix in there or not. So I'm done arguing. I just will do whatever the consensus is to do. And I see Randy's hand raised. Please go ahead.
Can't you just say this is not required, but just in case you need it, here's a transition mechanism?
That's what I tried to say, and people still don't like it. So, and I'm kind of done wordsmithing on it. So, I mean, if somebody wants to wordsmith it some more, that's okay with me, but I'm fine with just taking it out too.
Okay, and I have one quick comment. I know you've listed who are the editors and who are the authors. I just don't know. We'll go back as a chairs and discuss about this also along with you. But I'm assuming remaining authors are okay if editors just get to stay on the front page, right? Because there are more than 5, it seems like.
I would encourage the chairs to bring that up directly with the author list. I can't
All
speak
right.
for anyone.
Thank you.
Okay, I see that I have 40 seconds left. Fortunately, we've hit all of the contentious points. Just to reiterate, I'm going to propose, and I'll follow this up in email, that the plan of record is that Appendix A is going to be deleted, but I'll obviously confirm that on the list. If you have an objection, speak up. And I don't think that there's anything contentious in the points Jeff brought up, so I'm going to try to end on time here unless there's any objection from the group. Thank you very much.
I'm going to try to speak. Is this better, Jeff?
You are now
Sounds
loud
better.
and clear.
Okay. Thank you, John. I know John has a quick exit here, so if you would send him a chat or send him an email if you have a problem, but we're going to go on with the rest of the agenda. I intend to start the working group, the second working group, last call on this new text, pretty shortly after John finishes and all the discussion closes down, because I think it'll help people keep the context. Okay, let me share. The next is let me go share the agenda again so you can see it. You should be able to see it also. We're going to start through a sequence of discussions on the CAR and CT issues. In case you haven't seen your email, please look at your email. I did send out a longish thing. You can also see specifically about, I've also posted on the IDR wiki both the issues list and the Shepherd's report. With that, I'm going to pop up and pick up the preloaded slides for the Shepherd's report. And DJ, if you would make sure you're ready to go, because we'll go right into your slides. Okay. Thank you, DJ. So the slides are on the wiki. The location for the slides are on the wiki there. CAR, I split the issues and the Shepherd's list. That allowed us to get the issues out shortly. The CT, the list, and the Shepherd report are intact. You can also get to their GitHub. We are strongly encouraging you, if you have interest, to get to the GitHub. Now, folks, I've added a few graphics because I'm hoping it'll tell you where we are. So here are the issues that were raised in the CAR working group last call. The detail on this is in the issues list and the Shepherd report for that. Jeff, did you need something right now?
You're done with the end of this slide.
Okay, so in my discussion, we've walked through in the working group last call we did around IETF, we had one log mail thread, but inside of it, we had questions about motivation for the IP prefix. Why was the type 2 NLRI prefix added? And that's one of the real keys for why I wanted to make sure we clearly discuss that. Questions about the clarity for the type of support in sections. We had a security concern. um, I'm I kept this in because we really need to make sure that as we're going forward, we consider the security for the intent issues. I'm not sure. There was a lack of clarity in procedures in sections 8 through 10. There was a relationship about multiple drafts. I want to make sure that we understand any antecedents. That means the things that came before this draft, things that go there and correctly note them. There's the CAR and SAFI and the CAR VPN SAFI. Are we using it for transport? And then what are we doing with the service families? Okay, there are, Jeff, did you want at the end of this slide?
Yeah, I think this is the appropriate place to raise the point. So one of the other things that we had also talked about as well is that the type 2 as part of the discussion is apparently moving as a item that is not specifically color aware in the original sense of the draft that was adopted. So there's a chance that this work is basically out of charter for this specific document. So while the work itself may be useful, this may be something that it may be more appropriate to pull to a different document, and it may just address some of the issues.
We're gonna let the authors answer that question themselves.
Yes.
As it hasn't been in, I've had discussions with them where they have suggested it's a tight binding with color, so I'm gonna let DJ speak to that point, and I'm sure Swadesh and Kara can help him with that. And we need to talk about how the CAR SAFIs support the service families and which service families they support. So the other thing that I did is I sent out early directorate reviews, and we've been very thrilled that we got the directorate reviews, and I missed the Obster directorate review here as well. So the routing director, it simply said there's issues, and it should, the introduction should cover why the AFI-SAFIs are used and why 2 NLRI types. I think that's sort of what Ben said. The Obster review said a bit more. It said the amount of abbreviations were there without explanations. It's this draft, it said E is globally unique, which makes E C in that order unique. And it's looking for an explanation. Maybe that needs to be front end loaded so the rest of the draft. And then we come back to the type 2 NLRI for the prefix and how it's used. Then there was also a very good point that I'm hoping that Joel and the folks from CIDR will help us with. There is a dependency on the progression of draft IETF HR Spring intent where routing using color. my understanding is Joel is pressing forward to get that into an adoption. We may flag that if that doesn't happen. The need for an operations section and lots of operations. You can see the detail behind the editorial issues in the Shepherd's report. I've got to tell you that some of the car stuff, as we're going forward, we have to resolve the things that we didn't really take time to resolve beforehand. But that's mostly the Shepherd saying, did you think this was really settled? And I note that DJ may make comments on this in his thing, or it may be something we have at a different time. And the last is we need to confirm this technology. And you'll find these last things are appropriate for both, as we really are trying to ask the working group. And we've got to resolve these so that when I hand these to Andrew, he knows that we've closed off on the issues. Now, we're going to go to the car authors, and I believe, are we DJ or is it Swadesh presenting? DJ?
So I'll present. Can you hear me?
So it's your presenting? Okay, let me
Yes.
stop the side share and see if I can try to share preloaded slides. Do you know which one to click on?
Me? If it
Yeah.
shows up here.
Let me see if I can get it for you.
Yeah, there was an updated version.
Yeah, hopefully we've got the, okay, hopefully you've got the draft. Does this look like the updated version? Where would you see a change?
In in a later slide. So maybe should I just get started?
Get started, and if we have it, we'll try to pull in the new slides.
Okay, sounds good.
It looks like I have control, so I'll keep control. Just tell me next when you want the next slide.
Sure. Yes, we can continue. Yeah, so I mean, just for some background context, the car solution draft was adopted at IETF 114, and we had broad multi-vendor and operator support both during the adoption and at the working group last call, as Sue indicated in her mail to the list. And we have had two interoperable implementations for most of the content in the draft. In terms of progress, as Sue mentioned, a bunch of issues or questions were raised during working group last call, and we've been working with Sue to drill down into concrete action items, since some of the items raised were addressed in the draft, but perhaps not clear enough or not in the right location. So that's something we've been working on. And then we are also addressing additional reviews that we have gotten from Ben and Nixon. And then in terms of an implementation update from the time of working group last call, shortly thereafter, we have updated the implementation report to say we have one, sub implementation of the type 2 route. And I believe another one is in the works. Next slide, please. Yeah, as again, on Sue's request, we're kind of trying to focus on a few key aspects. In general, the motivation for the two route types that are defined. I mean, of course, one was more recent, but what's the motivation? What's the difference? And then yeah, just getting into some clarifications with respect to the commonality of the procedures, and then the trying to resolve any lingering questions about the SAFIs, right? What's used for transport, what's used for service. Next slide, please. Yeah, so to begin with, and this is something we did cover in the during the last session, the motivation for the IP prefix route, specifically, that's the route without color in the NLRI, though it's still in the context of car, is for and supporting the SRv6 based overlay services. I mean, for folks would be familiar with the RFC 9252, which describes a whole list of services that can run over an SRv6 transport. And there's two broad models described there. One is the case where a service SID is non-routed in the transport network or the underlay, and instead there is an SRT policy that provides a path, a reachability through the underlay for a given intent. And then of course the service SID is processed at the egress PE. Now, in terms of BGP car, as with what we've seen with MPLS and SR-MPLS, we had support for redistributing an SR policy that may exist within a domain, but cannot be propagated into the multi-domain network for various reasons, and BGP car is used instead. So that's the direct applicability here as well. For the type 1 route gets used for that use case. Now, but additionally, RFC 9252 defined a routed service SID model, wherein the service SID that is advertised with the various VPN or overlay services are resolvable and routable in the underlay, and the reachability, whether it's for best effort or it's for an intent, is provided by route distribution through through an via an underlay routing protocol. There the context was in the in a sort of a IGP based underlay network. So hence we had IGP Flex Algo being providing the reachability by distributing SRv6 locators or summarized routes, IPv6 routes in the underlay. Here, since we are in the context of a multi-domain network using BGP, naturally the locator prefix or the summary would be distributed using BGP. And here since we are using BGP car as a transport mechanism for underlay intent-aware routing, it's just a natural extension to distribute the locator prefix in BGP car, and that's where the type 2 route has been defined. Yeah, the rest is all pretty straightforward. It could be redistributed from an IGP Flex Algo or originated from the PE, all the things that we generally do with BGP. Next slide, please. So yeah, just digging a bit into the design of the IP prefix route. Now here, specifically, a route type was defined wherein the key of the NLRI, happens to be just the IP prefix, and it really follows from the model, that's used for SRv6, where a unique locator prefix is assigned for a given, intent or color. The other aspect is it's this IPv6 prefix route is routable. It's installed in the IPv6 forwarding table. From the route processing semantics point of view, this is just an IP prefix. Hence, the mechanisms of RFC 4271 and multi-protocol BGP apply here. It's just IPv6 unicast prefixes getting distributed. So there's no new or special semantics that this introduces other than the encoding, and we'll get into that a bit in the next slide or two. From the color awareness, we still have the notion of using color based next hop resolution or the SID selection at an egress device. The route policies that may be based on color, the use of AIGP, all the processes that procedures have been defined in the car draft for the type 1 route, they apply to the the type 2 route as well. This includes the the notion of carrying an end-to-end color, even though it's not in the NLRI in this case for the reason that I mentioned. you still want to be able to carry a distinct color that goes across the multi-domain network. And with the type 1 route, we had defined a local color mapping extended community, and so we just extended its use here for indicating the end-to-end color for the type 2 route. So again, the procedures that apply and have been defined for the in the draft for the type 1 route continue to apply. Yeah, next slide, please. So so here we just contrasting the two, and of course the motivation for having both in the car SAFI. I think clearly, I mean I'm presuming the type 1 route is fairly familiar to most folks, but just to quickly indicate what the difference. Here you have you have an IP prefix or an address on a router, but the requirement is to be able to create multiple unique BGP routes in the network, each which could get its own best path, multipath, filtering, etc., and actually propagate along different paths in the underlay. So that distinction is needed, and hence we have the E-C route as just a natural extension of what's being used in the underlay today, which is BGP IP or BGP LU, where you only had the prefix. So now we have prefix plus color. Now, in contrast to that, the type 2 route is, as we just saw in the earlier slide. Here we have a 1:1 relationship between the intent and the IP address or prefix. As SRv6 being a prime use case. Here we do not have a requirement to have multiple instances of the locator for different colors. In fact, we do not want it. So from a data model perspective, it just naturally falls into you have a defining the key that doesn't allow for that sort of divergence. So you just have the prefix that's required, so the prefix is part of it. Then again, to reiterate, we everything else in terms of the procedures, the mechanisms, the extensions, the encodings, they continue to be reused across both the type 1 and type 2 routes. And then, as we've seen, I mean, it's a common use case. The use case is intent-aware routing for SRv6 in this case, but you could also say there are networks where we would have MPLS or SRMPLS with transition to SRv6. The use case is intent-aware routing. So regardless of the the route type or the encoding that we've defined, there is a commonality between the the two route types, both from an implementation perspective as well as from an operational perspective. It would just be simpler to have these routes in in a single SAFI. And then when it comes to SRv6, we also have a case where both the the type 1 and the type 2 route are used simultaneously to get both the benefits of an SR policy being extended across a multi-domain network, as well as getting the benefit of summarization in the underlay. So hence this was just defined as a separate route type in the car SAFI. Next slide, please. This is just an illustration, to highlight the fact that regardless of the NLRI format, the model, the routing model is still the same, flat routing model that we have with BGP card for MPLS for type 1, as well as what we had with BGP and IP and LU. So there's no difference in any behaviors or semantics with the introduction of the type 2 route. Next slide, please. Right now, I mean, maybe drilling down one more level on the choice of the Y route type, And I think here just refer to, so Sue, I think, yeah, this does look like it's an older version. But yeah, I think that's fine. It's just a reference to the exchange on the list. The, I mean, there was a suggestion or a query from Jeff about whether we could have just used the type 1 route and used a special, color like 0. Now, of course, we could have done that. I mean, it's an encoding, right? And there was a reference to something similar that has been done on the on the CT side for best effort routes. It's just that this would be an overloading of the of the e-commerce route, this notion of a special color 0, and we would have exceptions all over the place that it deals with the value of the color. There's also aspects that were in the email exchange. I haven't put them here in terms of what's the color value 0 is not something that's standardized as part of the color definition in RFC 9256. And the semantics of having a 0 value and treating them with or without the color extended community. So you get into a lot of redefinitions to handle this. It just looked hacky. So then, given that the car Safi was built for extensibility, we have defined a route type. It was just a natural choice to use a distinct route type to give it that distinction in the processing that it needed. But again, as you said, it doesn't really change. Regardless of encoding, the actual semantics associated with the route that we saw in the the previous couple of slides, they don't change, right? I mean, we're talking about a routable prefix that's distributed in the underlay, installed in the IPv6 forwarding table, used for resolution. So it doesn't change the actual behavior. It changes the encoding. So, but I think the fact that we used the route type seems to have raised a lot of concerns, and but we see here that we've had a similar example in the other Safi as well, where we have some special behavior or a value that's being used for carrying best effort route. So I think a bunch of the issues that have been brought up, and we'll cover them in the remaining slides, they seem to be done in the context of the new route type, but they really aren't. And I think that's what we're hoping to convey and have some resolution about. Next slide, please. Okay, so now we try to go into some of these issues. So the first one, it is more, I think, just about the clarity of procedures, and I think I won't go through all of this. I mean, there's a bunch of sections describing different procedures. Most of them are common to BGP, any Safi really, but then there are some which are car specific, color related. Now all of them apply to the type 2 route, and there's reference in in the in section 10, which describes that, but not in specific detail on each and every one of these. And I think part of the discussion with Sue has been, let's be very precise. So I think that's something we'll do, along with some reordering of text to maybe improve the flow in the document. Next slide, please. Now, this is about, I think in general, we have covered this, and the concern was that the prefix route was something new that came in after adoption. While that is certainly the case, the support for SRv6 was something that was an action item. I mean, it's something that we had said we would add at the adoption time, and as part of that is we defined the use of the IP prefix route. But again, if you're going back to the actual semantics that it introduces, I mean, it's as we've seen, it's just a regular IP prefix, so it's not introducing something unique or novel, apart from it's a new route type. It's using the mature IP unicast implementation and design, both from protocol specification point of view as well as from the implementation. And we've had proof of that as we implemented the type 2 route. I mean, it's pretty much straightforward leverage of what we've had with the IP unicast SAFI. And then the color specific aspects, the use of the LCM, the use of the color EC, for various aspects, they really remain the same. There's no difference. So in that sense, we don't consider this as a big change. Next slide, please. Now, this one is a interesting one because there was a issue raised whether the introduction of the prefix route, and as we see, it seems to be about the route type, but you would expect the same concern to be there for any SAFI that distributes an IP prefix with color, without color, with RD, without RD. The question is whether this is introducing some security risk, or is there some route leaking that may happen, sort of break the walled garden. Now, I mean, in the CAR draft, you clarified, this is prior to these comments being made, we have the security section, which clearly calls out that it's a separate SAFI that carries infrastructure routes. This provides actually a separation between any overloading that might be happening with other SAFIs, like you have the BGP IPv4, IPv6 SAFI, which carries internet routes, or BGP LU, again, 3107, there's usage of service routes in that SAFI. Using the CAR SAFI for the transport routes automatically provides that separation, and hence it's actually addresses this notion of route leaking or wall garden instead of actually introducing it, right? You have the automatic separation. You do not have route leaking between the CAR SAFI and the IP unicast SAFI. And this is something, operationally it's a benefit as well. And again, this is all documented in the draft, because one then doesn't need to worry about having a specific route filter at the peering points towards customers or towards the internet, which you would have if you were trying to carry these infrastructure routes in a SAFI like BGP IP v4 or v6.
Don't worry about. Just finish through your slides, DJ. Don't worry about the clock.
Sure.
Okay.
Okay. Sure. So yeah, I mean, it's So in fact, what we're saying is the use of the CAR SAFI actually provides the separation and the so-called wall garden rather than break it. So it's it's not clear why this concern is there. Now there is of course a question about what happens if somebody did do redistribution. I think we have another issue talking about that, so I'll go there. The one thing that Sue had brought up is, even though these sections do call out the use of the CAR SAFI for infrastructure routes, so let's be very clear in the introduction and through the document. So that's something again we will work on. Next slide, please. Right. So I think so there was an issue raised whether again, this is I think coming out of the fact that we used a route type. Is that EVPN had used route types, and one of them is the type 5 route, which carries an IP prefix. So whether there's any related concerns. Now, I mean, we really don't want to be getting into a question of what were the issues with EVPN, because that's that's kind of out of scope of what this particular discussion is about. But suffice to say that again, CAR carries infra routes, not service routes. So from usability aspect, I don't think we have that whatever issue. Secondly, as we said, the CAR SAFI does not get mixed or redistributed into like the IP unicast SAFI. So we don't have this concern or question of inadvertent leaks by default. Now, if one did go ahead and enable redistribution, maybe for some maybe it's a brownfield case, we don't know. And so if they did that, this would be the case for any two BGP SAFIs, both existing and new. It's not specific to CAR, and it's not specific to the route type 2 for certain. I mean, we have examples today where we have SAFI 1 and SAFI 4, and there's in some implementations there's an automatic redistribution because it's the same table. In others, you have to enable it. But in the end, those are two SAFIs which are between which you're exchanging routes. Or you would have, I think, in the parallel context, we have the case with SAFI 4 and BGP-CT as called out for that best effort case. It's the same use
DJ, I
case.
think what you're trying to say is what John Scudder said earlier. BGP allows policy that allows redistribution, and if someone does it without knowing what they're doing, they can cause themselves problems, or they can enable something that's important. I think that's what you're trying to say here. Is that correct?
That is true, Sue. That's exactly true. But I think what we are also saying is, at least in the what we are also saying is, this is not a specific problem to the car route type 2 or to the car SAFI. And the moreover, the thing is, it's not as if this is a unsolved problem. I mean, since this problem already exists, if at all it did, the answer is the fact that path attributes are propagated when these routes are redistributed, and hence, as long as we maintain the BGP IPGP semantics, the existing procedures should suffice to the extent that they do, right? So we don't see a specific issue here with respect to car and the route type 2. Yeah, next slide, please. Okay, now there was the question of whether we have clarity on what SAFIs are used for service routes. And so, I mean, the section 3 in the draft already lists the SAFIs that are steered into BGP car. It talks more generally in terms of the nature of the service, IPv4, v6, L3 VPN, etc. And it also refers to SRT in RFC 9256 compatibility. So then there's a list of SAFIs listed there. So in general, we define. I mean, the service SAFIs is an ongoing list, right? I mean, I think new services can always come in, but we called out, the common services that can get resolved or steered over an underlay, and certainly with BGP car. But I think Sue has suggested being a bit more explicit, so we'll work on that. Next slide, please. Sorry, Keyur, did you have a comment to make?
Yeah, I have a quick comment on this slide. Speaking as a co-author with a working group chair hat off, there are multiple use cases where this could be used depending on what the service SAFIs could be, or what SAFIs could act as a service routes. Giving an example of 3107, just as L3 VPN recurses over 3107, which recurses over IGP, or an L3 VPN can recurse over IGP directly, applicability of this SAFI could be used somewhat in that context as well. And just as 3107 doesn't provide any clarity over what all service SAFIs it could be used for, it's my personal opinion to say that it's great to provide the clarification, but you don't need to add any text in the document. If we need to add any text, that should be a separate applicability document. Thank you.
Care for that opinion. There is the contrary thing that this is new and you have to know exactly what your, when you implement this spec, what are you implementing and what are you doing? But we're running out of time, and we'll pick up this in the discussion as well. Those are the 2 points. I'm going to go on and let DJ finish his presentation.
Sure. So thanks. Just one thing I would like, just a quick comment on your response. There is no specificity in terms of steering that is very car specific, and that's the thing section 3 lists out as well. The steering, service steering, has always been compatible with what's already defined and implemented in other solutions like SRT. So that's where the RS 9256 comes in. And then, of course, for SRv6, we already have 9252, which again the car SAFI adheres to. So that's one benefit, in that there's no specific thing for steering that the car solution introduces. It's just leveraging what's already standardized. But with that, yeah, I'll just can we go? Yeah, thanks. So I think, yeah, the related, potentially related issue has been, yeah, what, the use of the VPN car SAFI. And I think, just to contrast it with what we discussed just now, VPN car essentially extends the notion of color aware routing to the customer, network, and hence so that it allows a customer who's running car in their network, they can still get that those paths extended across a service provider on through which they are getting transport service. The car SAFI still carries infrastructure routes, so this is one very good use case is a CSE like deployment which needs intent awareness. And of course, VPN car is a separate SAFI as described in the draft. The the notion, I mean, because there was a question about the procedures. What we've described is it follows the same VPN semantics and procedures that RFC 4364 defines. The difference is just that the NLRI is a car NLRI, so that's why it's a separate SAFI. And of course, there is a VPN RD here. I mean, just to, since there's always a question about what is this. Here, this is just a regular, VPN RD as, you have with RFC 4364 because it distinguishes car routes that a service provider may get from different customers. So it just provides that, the standard, use case for which it was, defined. It's to differentiate routes from different, customers. All the car SAFI procedures apply. But again, I think Sue has suggested we add more detail in terms of the specific procedures, so we'll do that. Then yeah, next slide, please. Okay, I think, yeah, so this is just we've walked through the various issues. I think, fully we've clarified the applicability. I mean, they're not specific to the route type, and certainly not, in some cases not specific to the car SAFI. Procedures wise, yeah, I mean, even though it is that we have defined a new route type, the whole intent and we see that in the spec and the implementation, there is a good deal of consistency between the two route types, and the applicability is also for a common use case. So hopefully this addresses some of the concerns, and we'll work on any improvements to the text as suggested by Sue. Thank you, folks. Oh yeah, is there a next? Oh, sorry. Yeah, so I think we are in the in the process of updating, and we'll be publishing a O3 version soon with a bunch of update, bunch of review feedback from different folks incorporated. So thank you, folks, for the comments.
Thank you, GJ, for the good presentation. Care, did you have additional comments? Okay. Care, I see you pop in the, okay. With that going, we're going to go on to the CT. There, is there any clarification questions for DJ? Okay, I will go on to the Care. Did you have a clarification question?
No, so sorry, Sue. I wanted to let folks know, again, speaking with working group chair hat off and author hat on. The issues that were listed, we plan to document and put some kind of text in the draft where it's deemed necessary, where we think we should provide explanation, sufficient explanation to working group and get around to that. We would like to do that. If there is a specific guidance of what needs to go where, then we would welcome that, Sue. But that's the path we are going to take after this interim.
Okay, sounds good. Nats, did you have a comment, or are you prepping for the presentation for CT?
No, I have a quick comment. Thanks for the clarifications, Dhananjay. And yeah, so a couple of ambiguities I see that I wanted to record. Nothing really needed to be answered right now. We can take it in the work group if needed. So one is the problem with where is my color ambiguity. So some quoting from some sections. So in O2, so for a car route, generally color EC takes the precedence over the route NLRA color. So at this point, the type 1 color seems to get thrown off when there is a color EC on the car route. So I'll post all this in the group. So I'm just trying to go and record these points right now. A car route may recursively resolve over any BGP route carrying TEA. So there is some needs to be a gap. So the gap is color. So car NLRA type 1 color or LCM EC is a no when color is present on the car route. Color EC is present on the car route. So at this point, because color EC takes precedence, so that point of precedence is not clear which to take or what to take. So the above statements invalidate the need for color in the NLRI or the LCM EC if color EC takes the precedence. So that's one. And we're not able to really get the precedence between the color EC and LCM EC use cases. And for some of the Anycast use cases where color EC is actually used, there is a mandatory that two different boxes generate the same label. So those are things where there is a should or a must clause need to be added accordingly. So I can point it to that. The second ambiguity is that the MPLS SRv6 interworking, where we have, say, one side is MPLS IPv6, other side is MPLS SRv, just an SRv6 network with IPv6 forwarding plane. So in such cases, the type 1 routes and type 2 routes need to have some interoperation procedures. So those procedures need to be clearly mentioned, I believe. And if there are any caveats there, that needs to be noted in this draft, because type 1 and type 2 interoperability for type 1, type 2 NLRI, I don't see. So that's one more that I would wish to record. That's it from me.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, thanks, Nats. I think, sorry, Asu, do you have a...
Just a minute. Nats, please send these to the list to make as soon as you finish the discussion so that we can get good minutes. Thank you.
Yeah, so sure, Susan. I have composed, so I've been contemplating whether how to send it. So I'll good that I can send it to the work group. So I will.
Sure. Thanks, Nats. I think the color EC related question or issues, I think there are things already described in the draft. So I think maybe based on your mail, we can look at the specifics and respond with what's needed.
Yeah, sure, DJ. Let me just follow the forward you my thought process. Just go through it. Yeah.
Sure. And then, as far as that interworking goes, I mean, the idea has been that interworking, there is a, draft for SRv6 MPLS interworking, and the idea has been that will get extended for, interworking procedures, in the context of...
Yeah, I am aware of the draft. Maybe we can take it offline. Maybe
Absolutely.
get Kali to present. Yeah, sure.
Thanks.
Kaliraj is waiting for is being kind to be ready for his part of the presentation. I'll try to keep us up on time. We will, if not, we will just take some of this time out of the discussion sequence. We do have this meet echo until 12:30, so I did plan for run over today. Again, if you want to look at the Shepherd reports, you will see the Shepherd reports. And now I'm going to the Shepherd comments for CT. By the way, this was my cute idea to show that I'm shepherding lots of different opinions. And for each of these, I tried to find a graphic that was vendor neutral. That is actually a CT scanner. So I hope a little humor in the day is useful. let's look at the CT working group call. K10 has been wonderful to take and look at these drafts and provide comments. And so just as he provided comments to John Scudder that are very helpful, he's provided some comments. He's indicated inconsistency, removal of text provided by other drafts, SR V6 support requires features in individual draft. You'll find that this particular issue is also mentioned by Jeff Haas. There are specific technical details that weren't mentioned in the text, Caton, but if you would make sure to finish that up, at least they weren't mentioned in the high level. Did they get mentioned to the authors as well?
Yeah, so Ketan here. So they were in the body of the email and
my
classified major. So those were the
I'll
but
amend my
yeah.
I'll amend my Shepherd's report. I'm sorry I missed it. Thank you, Kate, for again just going through all of this carefully. We really approve. This is technology I think will last for a while. I'm a proponent of intent-based or color-based work. So if you are someone who wants to just sit down and review these specs, please do that. I would really appreciate any reviews you have. Jeff noted, and Jeff, I'm going to ask you to be ready to comment on what I might have missed in the high level report in case you want to provide that. He also noticed inconsistent terminology, normative sport added for individual drafts, and I think that's a very key point. Again, the same type of drafts, inconsistent terminology and editorial. Now, folks, this is a snapshot at the time of working group last call. Kaliraj will provide his status report as of now. The adoption call, I'm going to remind you that during June and July for the CT draft, we had repeated calls and I queried people specifically for responses. So I considered after all that work that if someone had some concerns about the adoption calls that were issues that were mentioned for CT, that hopefully they would have closed them at that point. I'm also requesting feedback on the working group. I've queried again, most people, issue 1 and 2 is off because those authors had finished. Issue 3 has been replaced with a chair team review. Jeff Haas did one and G will do one as well. Issues 4 on intended service level, review of technology base. The rest of those are open, but I have queried most of the people. If I do not get a response in the upcoming weeks on these, I will consider them closed as we go into a second working group. Last call. That is still also true for any things that I'm outstanding from adoption call for car. I will do a call and I will then say that's it. We've closed those issues because they're available on GitHub. Working group early directed recalls. I really have to put my hats off to Med. Med did an excellent review of CT, and I think the authors are extremely grateful to his points. I believe all the issues were addressed prior to the working group last call, except for internal consistency of handling reserve bits. My understanding is, again, Kaliraj will provide you status on that. The Obster recall by Bo Wu is indicated not ready. CT has responded with fixes and awaiting Bo Wu's response. His review is on -12 and it had again 4 concerns. Operations and management section needs to be added. Section 10's application to network slicing, and that is more to have terminology correct. Sections 11 and 13, whether that could be combined, I think you'll find Kaliraj has done some combination of sections, so I'll leave that to him. And the following communities need explanation. So I will, why is color extended community not used? Why use mapping community? How do these interact with transport? So that's it. And now I'm going to slide share. Now, Kaliraj, if you want to run your own, click on the preloaded slide share. If you want me to run them, I will be glad to do that. What would you like?
Yeah, I think so. You can run it. I'll just say next slide.
Okay, let me make sure I get the right one. I apparently, there we go. Okay, just tell me when you want to go to the next slide.
Yeah. So before starting on CT, I want to just thank Nats for taking his time and recording the issues with the car draft. And I would also encourage other working group members to spend time in doing the thorough review, like what the CT others are doing. Okay, so this is the session to provide a status update on BGP-CT draft. So the agenda is quick. So we will just do a recap on the BGP-CT, what it is, and then go over some changes since version 12, and then status of the issues that are being tracked on GitHub, and the next steps. Next slide, please. So BGP-CT, what is it? So basically, it is an intern-driven service mapping solution that is transport protocol agnostics, supports the following transport protocols, RSVPT, UDP, etc., and SR protocols, SRT, ISS, FlexAlgo, OSPF, FlexAlgo, and it also supports MPLS and SR-based data planes. And it is service family agnostic. It supports various L3 services, L2 services, or flow spec-based services. And it provides per route granularity fallback options using some formalized constructs. So transport class and resolution scheme. So these don't need any standardization, but it's good to formalize these constructs instead of just saying that you do it in some way. So you can implement it in the way that you feel fit in your implementation, but it's good to just formalize the concepts just like next hour resolution. Here we are just saying use resolution scheme and transport class uniformly across the network so that we are able to accommodate homogeneously intent-driven service mapping for various deployment realities. And those deployment realities are basically it works the same manner in intra-domain, inter-domain, option A, B, and C. And a new SAFI 76 is defined only for the option C scenario. And it works the same manner for, or it works holistically for anycast as well as unicast endpoints, and it accommodates heterogeneous color domains as well as non-agreeing color domains. So if you are looking for an intent-driven service mapping solution, look no further. So we have something that is very comprehensive. So you can just go ahead and collaborate with us, implement it. If you want to look for some other alternative, yeah, you can spend more time doing that. But yeah, just want to let you know that we have a very comprehensive solution that's ready to go. Next slide, please. So yeah, so what are the changes since draft version 12 to version 16? So there have been a lot of good feedback that's coming in, and there are many editorial comments incorporated. We have reorganized the text and new subsections. So these are like taking care of difficulties readers were having in understanding the key concepts. So if you go to the table of contents now, you'll be able to clearly see what is the organization. Basically, you have the mapping community resolution schemes, the path selection changes that are required for handling the multiple ABR cases, avoiding routing loops. That's like a base RR in forwarding plane problem. So those things now stand out by being organized into proper subsections. And the thing about mapping community being a base class, and any BGP community can play the role of a mapping community. So mapping community is not a certain type of BGP community. It's not an IANA type. Basically, it's just saying that it's a role. And color extended community, transport target community, these are like two different, you can say, derived objects of a mapping community. They just have a relationship with mapping community. So the reorganized text and new subsections, they make the readability and understanding better, we would continue to welcome more comments about whether you find it useful or not, the reorganization. And we also added the error handling section where there's not much in terms of error handling, but we wanted to at least have a blanket statement saying, don't bounce the session or do something bad if you find something that you cannot consume in a BGP city update. If you're able to pass it properly, then keep it as a pretest withdrawal following 7606 RFC guidelines. And we have incorporated the comments from the routing direct review, like Sue was pointing out, excellent review from Med. And there's only one point that is starting out, that is the handling of the reserved bits. So basically there it is it's actually, we have taken the suggestion that Jeff has had on how to handle the reserved bits. Basically must set it to 0 on send and should ignore it and left unaltered on receive. So Matt's question is, when you're receiving it, why would you actually alter it? What are the cases where you would alter it? So I think the intent here is, the Jeff's intent is that when a new version implements or defines those bits, an old version should be able to at least do policy matches on those bits that will get defined in future, so that we can do some firefighting, filtering of things and stuff. So I think the way it can be clarified is the receive side can say that it should ignore on reception and must leave it unaltered. So that is the response I have on GitHub, where I've asked both Jeff and Med whether that looks okay. So once that is done, then that issue will be closed. And also another thing about the list of issues that Sue, you had in the previous report, separate report. So I think some of those issues are already closed. They have been email threads in the IDR where we had closure to that, or some, so we can just go over that offline and check with the concerned people and close.
I believe that to be true, Kaliraj. My shepherd's report was as of the end of the IDR, as at the end of the working group last call. So
Sure.
yes, I believe we can go through that.
Sure. And I would especially thank all the reviewers, both solicited reviews and unsolicited reviews. We were pleasantly surprised to see so many people reviewing enthusiastically the draft, and each review iteration and taking the comments in, it finished the draft, and now it's in a really good shape. And it's good to note that through all these cases and the newer what do you say, use cases coming in, like heterogeneous color domains, non-agreeing color domains, and SRv6 support, the original architecture that we put forth in the draft version 0, that has persisted without any technical changes. Next slide, please. Yeah, so there's just a summary of the GitHub issues that we just discussed. So there are like 15 issues closed so far and 10 open, and we will be tracking them. I think these are also closed. We have to track and get confirmation. And of these 10 issues, they are like the routing directory review, ops review, and the reviews from Ketan and Jeff that I replied last Friday, I guess. So this is just a tracker of the issues on GitHub. Next slide, please. So the next step is, we are pending the security directorate pre-review, I guess. So that we would request it to be assigned and done, and we just have to follow up and close the GitHub open issues, and then hopefully we are ready to go RFC. Thank you.
Hopefully, Kaliraj and Nats and Reshma, we can have a discussion this week on the closure. It looks like Swadesh would like to have a discussion. I'll pick up my comments later. Go ahead, Swadesh.
So I have a comment. It's a comment from the day one, and I think it still holds. And I have not seen any. I've seen responses, but it doesn't address the comment. And I have.
Yeah, go ahead, Swadesh.
Yes. So it was about the design limitation because of the RTs. I have sent multiple mails which you have replied to, but but I just want to capture that it's a significant deviation the way BGP IP or LU that works in the transport today, and where we don't have this duplicate route or churn issues, and we don't see these multipath and active backup in the BGP-LU, but BGP-CT is exposed to these suboptimal behaviors that we both have discussed on the email thread. And this is because of course, the data model of putting the RD in the transport in the hop by hop routing. And just to be specific, about the, just like to, I will complete it just probably, Kalyaj. Yeah. So when I say about the duplicate route churn or the multipath issues, I want to be explicit is that there is a lack of multipath or the localized fast convergence within the domain for the originator failure, as mentioned from the day one. And even though there are redundant routers, and it was mentioned, and then there's a workarounds or a scheme still in the later versions was backed by stripping the RD and coming up with a TC transport class and the IP allocation, which still doesn't fulfill the requirement because it does cause the duplicate or redundant BGP routes carrying end to end with the same forwarding information. That's critical part. You're carrying the multiple routes, and you have mentioned in itself. In fact, you have captured in the table itself that it's the same BGP routes, 16 routes with only 2 forwarding labels. I'm not sure how we can agree to such a procedures. And of course, and the third part is, since we are carrying these duplicate or redundant BGP routes, it will cause the increase in the control plane state, even though forwarding state is not there. And you're carrying information which is not required because of the data model you have picked. And it will cause the control plane convergence and the churn across the multiple domains. We are talking about multiple domains here, till the ingress P, whenever any local failure happens. So BGP-LU or BGP-IP, which was for transport, does not have these issues. I want to capture that. And if you are not addressing them, probably we should add these limitation in the draft. That's the way I want this to be.
I think there is some gross misunderstanding of what you have probably assimilated from the draft. But I think I'll let Kaliraj clarify. I think we clarified it enough.
So,
Yeah.
Susan, if you can go further to the backup slides.
Yeah.
If you just go to the next slide, next slide, next slide.
Yeah.
Yes. So this is.
So Kaliraj, we can.
Is everyone able to see the slides?
So Kaliraj, we can go over it. Probably better would be if you want to capture that table that you have created, and that table you yourself has captured that issue there. So means
I think we are trying to explain it using a topology.
So because you completed the question, can you allow me to answer?
Sure, Kaliraj, sure. Okay.
So basically, as you also noted that the table has all the different scenarios, and it has the worst case, it has the best case. And yes, what you're talking about is the worst case, and that provides the most visibility to the ingress. And when you have the most visibility to the ingress, then the routing state on the ingress will be high. And the case that you're talking about multiple redundant updates and withdrawals is, so there are multiple ways of deploying BGP-LU or CT, where you can originate the transport route, the CT route, at either the egress P or at the ASBRs. So the recommended way is to originate the route at the egress P. And when we originate the route at the egress P, the problems you're talking about don't exist. Basically, when the egress P is advertising it, then you will have the same RD colon EP, which is coming to ASBR 21, which is having 2 routes from ASBR 13 and ASBR 14. And when one of the paths goes away, so can you go to the next slide, please? So one of the paths goes away, link goes away, then this failure is observed locally at ASBR 22. As we can see in the forwarding plane, ASBR 22's label has just pointed to carrying the swap towards BL2, that is towards ASBR 14, and a backup towards ASBR 21. The label value has not changed because, yes, we are doing per transport class, per prefix level allocation mode. and none of the other nodes in the network know about this change. And only when there is a gold path, for example, broken end to end. For example, in this topology, we have carefully engineered this path such that the gold path exists only between ABR23 and ASBR22. So if that gold LSB goes down, so can you go to the next slide, please? So if this gold path goes down, then there will be a withdrawal for RD1 colon PE11 to the ingress. And that has to be propagated to the ingress because now the ingress knows that the gold path is not available. And the ingress will do fallback for each of the service route based on what they want. Because that information of the gold path is not available, gold intent is not available end to end, should reach the ingress. And ingress has to take on a per service routes basis, whether the service route wants to take a best effort backup or a bronze backup, it will do it based on the resolution scheme. So this is how it works. And the drafts, so we have given references to the draft sections which talk about this illustration. Those comments that you had were talking about this draft section and saying that the churn is not contained locally. So that is why I was repeatedly saying that for these scenarios that are described in the illustration, which are the recommended way of deploying CT, there is no redundant withdrawals or updates when the local failure happens. The case that you're talking about is for when the routes are originated from the ASBRs, that is ASBR 13 and ASBR 14, and they're using unique RDs on ASBR 13 and ASBR 14. And it is right that whenever the link will go down in that scenario, then you'll have withdrawal going for the ASBR 13 route if ASBR 13 and ASBR 14 are not configured with the same RD. So yes, your point is taken, but there are different ways of deploying CT or LU where you can avoid that problem. So that is my response.
So Kaliraj, I will again come back say if you are recommending now, because in the draft I thought unique RD is the recommendation, but if you are recommending now that on the P you have to originate the route, then I don't see how your advantages of using the RD are applicable. Now what you are saying is whatever the advantages we had with the RD, that on the ingress P, you can, for the debug purposes, from where it's originated, it's a single RD, it's a single P address. I don't see a reason to carry RD at all. And taking this uh, uh, a VPN semantics, which was running on the edge, and get exposed to these issues. And further, I know you're talking about
Single RD because multiple Ps will
I
use
think,
different RD.
yes, that's right. And you're
no,
not
so
really extrapolating into the the anycast use case also, Swadesh here.
so
Because
again, okay, let's
there
go to
we,
the
yeah, so
yeah.
any which way, right? We have the exhaustive table of how this can be deployed,
And that's what
and
my
each
concern is,
each
Nataraj.
operator, that's fine. An operator can choose how this, it gives us flexibility, and it's not really a huge concern here. You have multiple ways of deploying it. There are more recommended ways. And if we can say, we can actually fine tune, go into a deployment, fine tune how, say, somebody wants it to be deployed in their case. In that case, flexibility is more important, I think. If the visibility can be controlled, the way the routes has to be actually advertised can be controlled. And this level of control, I think, for such a use case of intent-driven service mapping is needed.
So
And if you're going
just
to actually, yeah. So anyway,
uh,
you can continue.
just to respond to that, Kaliraj, that I know you bring up the Anycast case, and therefore I will say the cases are, this problem is significant, and it's causes suboptimal problem, because as you have Anycast cases or too many originators, this problem gets heightened. Means it just multiplies the number of uh, routers which are originating it. Let's say I have such 10 ABRs which originates, you are carrying 10 times the copy of the routes, and the churn in the multi-domain case, the churn is significant. So I think this problem cannot be said, oh, it's a flexibility. It's not flexibility. It's a problem of using the RD at the in the
Depends.
transport, and that's
Yeah, it
exposes that.
depends on which
And
RD
I'm
you
gonna I'm
use.
gonna I'm gonna take a pause here.
Yeah.
Okay. Just out of fairness, I want to make sure Kaliraj has finished his slides and his status, and then we are in the middle of a discussion point. So first of all, Kaliraj, my understanding is you finished your status report before I
Yes,
let
that's
this
right.
discussion. Okay, Swadesh, as you go forward with your comments, since it's been back and forth 3 times, you've expressed your opinion. I've asked you in the chat to send the details on your concern, linking back to the original adoption call, which I think I've captured in the adoption call notes, your specific concern for this section. And now I'm going to add something. So please send that to the list so I can capture it and we can carefully let the working group discuss it prior to the CT second working group last call since you've raised it. The third point is you've added RD to CAR VPN. Can you compare and contrast uh, your RD situation or your RD use versus Kali Raj's RD use to tell us why his RD use is not appropriate and your RD use is for CAR VPN? That's just a request as part of the discussion. Please continue on. You have we have another 20 minutes to do this discussion. Okay, thank you.
Sure. So thanks. So thing is, for the VPN car, we are still carrying because VPN RD purpose originally was for the VPN purposes, and what I mean by that was carrying the customer routes across a provider network. Because when you have multiple customer routes, they may have a overlapping IP prefixes because they are different customers. They have their own IP space, and they could be overlapping in the provider space. So therefore, the RD is required, and that's exactly
So
is the reason.
but
Mhm.
just to make sure I understand that, uh, because DJ clearly said that the car VPN was being used for infrastructure routes. So could you just clarify with what you said as far as customer routes? Are you meaning customer infrastructure routes? Could you just discuss that a little
Yeah,
further?
yes. So it's for customer infrastructure routes. If the BGP car or intent awareness that customers of a provider like to use, then they will use their infrastructure routes with the car procedures. And when they go through a provider, they will go as a VPN car, and therefore the RD that is required there, because again the customer intent infrastructure routes for the customer, again their IP space may be overlapping or the color space. So therefore RD is required for that purpose, and RD is at the users only at the edge of the network, as we are aware at any service address family, whether EVPN, MVPNs, or anything else where the RD is applicable today. This is the first case where BGP CT is bringing the RD into a transport, into the hop by hop routing model, and therefore the problems are there with the RD. With the RD, you hide the provider space, a global provider space, and you end up into the issues that I listed about multipath or the any failure causing the network churn going to the other domains. And this
So
problems.
let me,
Mhm.
I'm sorry, let me just recap to this point. So what we're really talking about is you're both using RDs in the encoding, but what you're talking about is how you're using RDs and what the procedures for using RDs. Did I capture that in my understanding?
Yes, Sue. So just to be a little more precise, what we are using RD is for the original reason it was required for that. When you have uh, IP space which is for each customer infrastructure route or even service route, then you need it. That's you
I
can
would like
like
to
a
refute the
CSC
point that
CSC
RD is
like
used
model.
only at the edge of the network, because in
No, no.
option B, RD is also used at the
Oh,
bottom
oh,
nodes.
Khalid, I'm
I'm
not
sorry,
saying
You're
it
I
has to
missed
you're
be.
that.
not
Wait,
letting you're
wait,
not
guys.
letting us talk.
Sure. Go
Yes.
ahead, Natraj, if you wish to. Yeah. Mhm.
So basically, what I was saying was RD is not used only at the edge of the network, like you know about option B. RD is also used at the bottom nodes, and because it is a transport protocol, transport layer protocol, it will be used at all the bottom nodes. So you need to be specific about the procedures, just like how BGP-CT does, about how these RD manipulation and the route visibility, the churn, all these things happen for the VPN call.
As already mentioned about it, Kaliraj, it's exactly same procedures as the 4364 for the VPN car. But
That
for
is not enough.
BGP-CT and for BGP-CT, as I'm saying again, that you are doing at every BGP hop, as in your example, it's from P to the ASBR to the, it's an option C we are talking about here. We're not talking about option B, where you are trying to extend a VPN services across the administrative domain. That's a different case. Here, you're trying to create an option C model where BGP, where multipath or the churn going to other network is very important. If you don't want to contain that, I will leave it to BGP-CT. I'm not saying you have to address it. What I'm saying is these limitations need to be captured. It cannot just be deflected. We nearly. I'm just asking to be captured very clearly the problems of using the RT, because I have mentioned that in the email. In fact, after the working group last call also. So I just wanted to be captured if you're not getting addressed. That's what I will say. Thanks. And there are multiple other issues, Suze, I have raised about,
Okay.
but that was the main issue. Yeah.
Okay, Swadesh, what I've asked you in the chat is to provide a clear discussion so I can raise it in an email thread as before we go forward to CT's working group last call. Please send them to me within a day or so I can kick that off. Thank
So
you
I
for
see
that.
that. So I see what Swadesh is asking is to just record all the combinations, which is already recorded in a comprehensive manner in the draft. So I don't see anything additional that needs to be done.
That's fine, but let's to I make sure
Yeah, I
as the
think
shepherd so I
even
don't wait, guys. Time. Swadesh, send me the list so I can make sure I've checked off everything and we haven't missed anything. You say that Kaliraj has meant it. Let's slow this down and make sure we've checked everything off because we're going to a second working group last call. Will you do that for me, Swadesh?
Yes, so yes.
Thank you very much. Guys, let's try to slow the conversation down so people can hear it. I'm sure the debate is also on the interim so that we can let everybody else hear and hear your discussions. That's important at this point. I appreciate you being patient as we sort of slow it down. You guys have each of you have amazingly fast and creative minds. Now, Swadesh, if you want to come back in a moment, let's let Keaton try to ask his questions and then we'll try to slow this down a little bit. Thank you guys for the patience.
Sure. Go ahead, Keaton.
Hi. Actually, I wanted to share a suggestion on the debate that we were just having. The CT draft does have a lot of flexibility and options, and it's captured very nicely in a table. Could the authors just consider maybe having like a pros and cons of each design in a text? I remember there was something about an operational consideration section. Maybe if you could capture the pros and cons of each of this flexibility design option, I think that might just
Sure, will do.
Yeah, so I think it's a good suggestion. So broader pros and cons of the nature of these patterns, maybe we can do. Because it's just like a truth table. We'll take like the first 3 items of the truth table and we can do.
We'll do that. Thanks, Keaton.
Yeah. I do not know how much time we have.
You have until 12 more minutes. You'll see it in the chat window for the discussion. I planned extra for this discussion because I knew it would be fruitful. So please go ahead.
Okay, so since this is an interim and we have relatively more time to discuss, I thought we would probably at least take a few things for discussion. This is thing. And so I would like to first start with the normative reference and dependencies that the CT draft has on a few few individual documents. And while some of them are like additional functionality or benefits, I can say that like for SRv6, the core procedures also depend on draft SALI to realize the basic support for SRv6. So I think this is more of a discussion now on how this can be addressed really. I sense from the response from the authors that they want to document like a full and complete proposal as somebody would do, in any general document or a white paper. But here we are dealing with an IETF specification, which has, normative and informative parts, and we have some process or the way we go about it. So yeah, basically I wanted to open up a discussion and see how we can, because how this thing can be addressed, because the way it is done right now, the shape, I'm not really sure this would go past the working group last call, right? It's just a question that I'm asking Sue to you as a shepherd mainly.
This is unusual for IDR, and this is an experimental draft. Okay, if it was going forward as a proposed standard, I would probably cut all the appendices. As a discussion, you will find that for the non-normative, or i.e. individual drafts, that is something that both you and Jeff called out, that you need to have a solution that handles it without the individual drafts, since that can't go forward to a standard. So that's not a yes or no, Caton, because experimental drafts do put in additional information as far as the one I've read, and I've actually tracked the 28 years of history for experimental drafts. I know, weird thing to do, but and they do contain more information just because it's a documenting of an idea before a proposed standard. But they should have, to be a standard, they have to not reply to informational drafts as normative. I hope I said that in two different ways. Hopefully it's clear, because it's an in-between answer. Please let me know if I was clear.
Not really. So I think it's all of us, including the authors, agree that they are normative references. The recent update clarifies that. So I think so. The question is not about informative references. The question is about normative reference.
Yes, and normative references have to not be to an individual draft.
They are currently to the individual draft.
Yes.
I think that's the thing that we are trying to discuss. And I think if I may just continue for a minute.
Please do.
I think the solution is there, and which I had also suggested. I believe Med has also brought it up, and I have not seen Jeff's detailed review, but I think he may be also suggesting is to, just take them into separate documents, because except for the SRv6 functionality, which is we can say is core, the other things are more like added things, and they can proceed in separate documents. So I leave it to the authors,
Yeah, I
whether
mean,
to do
we
how
wanted
to
to
do it.
understand that better. Basically, is it like you should not have any references to individual documents at all, or
No,
how?
normative. Normative references, right? So normative is where, in order to achieve a functionality, there is the need for some other functionality to be implemented. If that one,
Right.
yeah.
let's say we move the SRv6 functionality to a separate document. Do we have any reference to that at all, saying that this other document is going to
You
handle
could have
SRv6?
an informational reference to that, because you say that, I mean, it's like SRv6 is taken care of in that document, something of that nature, right?
Okay. Okay. I think
Does
the
it make
only,
sense to Jeff? Sorry, I see Jeff also.
Yeah. So one more thing I want to just add is just that as part of this early working group last call review, I think we did some exhaustive review of the other draft in the SRv6 as well from Jingrang and G also. So I think the procedures were, they did go through and verify it, and we do have some. We are trying different angles here. One of the angles is to get that draft adopted in the spring, and the author group Haibo, who was part of the CBR approach, is also part of this approach. So I think we're trying to go and ask for adoption on that draft as well. So we are thinking on these lines as well. But right now, I don't know if we have any very clear idea. I think it's a good discussion to have how to go about it, but not really. We're not cemented on anything yet, so we can discuss.
Sure, and I think that is fine.
Yeah.
This was just more of a discussion, anyways, on options. Jeff, did you have something on this?
Okay, microphone should be working now. So this is back to the normative, informative, and also no split discussions. SRv6 clearly has been the problem use case that's been difficult to capture in the documents. So both sets of the proposals have spent a lot of energy trying to figure out what a SRv6 route with color would look like in each of the proposals, and I think each of the proposals has done a fairly clean job of that piece. If it became the case that that was the single element that's holding up the authors, again, splitting things may make sense. And as it's been pointed out, an informative reference to say that this other document will solidify these things is an appropriate way to allow the proposals to advance. The place where I still find things, even after the presentations, potentially still on the slightly problematic side of things for the type 2s, I absolutely understand, sort of using my own loose restating of the use case, that these are SRv6 routes that are not intended to actually be containing colors for exactly the same use cases that the type 1s are. That makes sense. It successfully leverages the use case, and I think it does a nice job there. I don't think that was specifically covered by the work that we were adopting as we were moving forward. A way to simply address that entanglement and also the implementation considerations for allowing the document to advance on the RFC track is to simply do a split on the type 2s. That way the use case is further clarified and kept separate from the color aware use case that's the core of the CAR document that was adopted by the working group.
Okay, I think, sorry if I may, I think the discussion was, at least the point that I brought up was about normative and informative. I do not see such a issue in the CAR, but I think we can discuss in more detail on the list perhaps. I had some other things, but I'll go down and I'll come back up again.
Okay, Jeff, I'm going to ask you to raise your point on the list, if you would, please. Just as I asked Nats and Swadesh, if you would raise it so we can deal with it on the list. Thank you. Go ahead, Kayur, it's your turn.
Yeah, so this is Kayur again from Arcus. Again, speaking with working group chair hat off and as a co-author. ARCIS has an implementation of type 2 purely as a protocol developer and implementer and a working group member. Um, I would like to see a solid justification of why we want to split this into two different documents. From my perspective, I rather see them both being carried out in the same document unless we have real reason to say no. The only reason I would provide as a justification within the same document is we are implementing, we have implementations in place. We believe IPv6 should be handled, and there is no there is no reason why the procedures and rule sets of IPv6 will be any different than IPv4. So I'd like to see a real justification. If not, if we have to respin a working group last call, let's do that and we can probably get a consensus. Thank you. That's all.
Excuse me, Kara, as the shepherd, it is my intent to raise the points from Nat, Swadesh, and Jeff as a working group thread before we pick up for the Swadesh for CT, Jeff for car and CT, and Nats for car. I'm going to raise these as issues in the next week with a 2-week call. So we have time to work on this. And then if we can have time for the working group last call before the next ITF. This is carefully planned for this time so we can have those discussions. So please respond to Jeff's note on the list. I'll form it in a comment. And the same true is Nats and Swadesh. If you're finished, I think Ketan had the last set of comments, and then I will do the last topic in the remaining 20 minutes.
I was just going to quickly chime in and said I totally agree with your comments, and I'll take it on the working group as well. Thank you. Mailing list.
Ketan, more comments?
This is about the use or implicit null label as an indication that MPLS label should not be sent to that router, or that that router is not doing XMLS kind of a thing. Now in this, we have a good slide in front of us. If you look at this slide, and as I think Matt just mentioned, the recommended way to would be for the PE11 to originate its colored route into the transport, into BGP SAFI, right? So when it is doing that, I would expect normally that it would send it with an implicit null label, right? So this is a normal thing, and it's not really an indication to say that the ASBR should not send the packet using MPLS encapsulation to it.
Yes. Yes. Ketan,
So
the
yeah,
point that I was making was basically the implicit null just says that you don't need to impose a BGP label towards me.
right.
It does not make any distinction on what is the tunnel you use to reach P11. The Goldie
Right.
tunnel to P11 could be any NCAP.
Right. So I think we are on the same page there. So therefore, when we are doing we are working with two or multiple encapsulation, we need to have a way, a deterministic way to determine or know whether P11 does support MPLS and SRv6, one or the other or both, right?
But the way
And
today, yeah, go ahead, please.
yes, today, yeah, you're right. Today we have there is a challenge, and what I can say is that as part of again, this is the first time that I'm comparing with car now, but that was one of the main or key motivations for car to have the encoding that it has, to allow this indication explicitly without and in a clean way, because we were doing a new SAFI. So I think what I'll say is that we have to be careful making or saying things like we could send both SRv6 and MPLS together, and that both can be handled. So that was my point on the review, Kaliraj.
So I still think that P11, let's say if ASBR 13 supports only MPLS and ASBR 14 supports only SRv6 or UDP tunnel, then P11 could send on the same route encapsulation required at the BGP-CT layer for UDP tunnel or SRv6 or MPLS or all of these. And the receiver can push the payload at the BGP-CT layer, whatever encap is required. And this kind of a deployment is actually there for MPLS versus UDP tunnels today in one of our major
Today, yeah.
customers. So that works today. I mean, this is like at the BGP-CT layer, we are saying that you can use whatever encaps you want, but it does not dictate, even for BGP-LU or internet, it does not dictate what is the tunnel that we use to reach P11. There are some mechanisms like TEA where we can say that, okay, to reach P11, you use this specific type of encap. Those things are there, but still, we usually use whatever tunnels we could find in the transport grid to P11. It could be MPLS, it could be SRVC, it could be UDP tunnels, and there is some flexibility in doing that. If we need a specific tunnel to be reached, in the CT model of doing things, you put those specific tunnels in a certain transport rib, and then you'll be able to resolve only that. So that's a way. But yeah, we could find the different other ways of explicitly requesting that this is the type of tunnel that I want, just like TEA or some other new mechanisms.
So in the example that you gave just now, MPLS UDP, what I will note is that in both the cases, the service label is an MPLS label. Here it's a little different because the actual packet that is carrying the SID, it could be an IPv6 packet in the case of SRv6, and then or it could be a label. And if it's a label, we should not end up carrying a wrong service data type, service context data type to the wrong P.
Right.
I mean,
The example
we can
that
discuss
you gave,
online, but I think you got my point, right, Kaliraj?
yes, but I want to just clarify. The point that I made about the deployment was if I said UDP, that is incorrect. It's basically it was MPLS versus IP-IP. IP-IP does
In
not
IP
want
and
to,
IP, yeah.
yeah, IP-IP does not want to carry the MPLS label. So there is an embedded label ignore capability in the EA that is being sent. So different
Correct.
ingresses,
So,
they put
yes.
either
So
MPLS packet or an
which
IP
is
packet.
yes, which is fine. So if you want to, what I wanted to bring up is that if you want to use such a thing with TEA, I think that's completely fair, and you could do that. But that's not what's there in the draft today. And I mean, that was what my comment was. That
So TEA
if
is a
it's
way to say you push only IP/IP, but when you have the SRv6 SID, it just says that you push SRv6 SID.
SRv6, yeah.
Okay.
That's it.
okay. So I think
K10
we
and
can stop here. Yeah.
K10, what I would appreciate, and Kaliraj, is Ketan, I would appreciate if you would send me and Kaliraj your points. Kaliraj, I'd like to make sure we've solved all of Ketan's points, Katan's points, except for the normative one, as we're going to pick that up with Jeff. If you would help me complete that cycle this week, I'd appreciate it. Is that okay, both of you?
Sure, thanks.
Okay. Care, did you have something quick? Because I need to do some close down on this discussion, and then hopefully I can do the flow spec v2 quickly.
Oops, sorry. No, I apologize. I should have taken myself off the queue.
That's okay. Okay, folks. First of all, thanks for everyone who listened. It's important when you listen to hear all the pros and cons. It's important that we get these we will be doing these filters. Nat, Swadesh, Jeff, please send me the stuff today. I'll start that. Ketan and Kaliraj, I'd like to get your discussion finished by Friday so I can at least give a week to 2 weeks. Now, the thing I'd intended, so please do this so we can do that before we do the CT calls. I'm trying to get CT and CAR toward their next working group last call for experimental. What we didn't get time to talk about is the next steps after. With consultation with my chairs, I may pull this off to another interim simply because we need to allow the other people some time at ITF 118. So watch your mail list for the discussion of the steps after. I've given you my Shepherd report, but the Shepherd report should always go along with a discussion. Any questions on that before I go to the next topic? Is my steps clear? Are my steps clear? Step 1, discussion of the key points raised before we do a CT last call. Second, CT and CAR before we do the last call. Second, perhaps have another discussion on steps after, so we have this longer debate time, in which case I will ask not a couple key non-authors to give their opinion, and then working group last calls. Okay. Thank you for your time. Let me do the one thing we need some feedback on. In this case, I'm a co-author. So chair head off, co-head authors on. I'm gonna ask Jeff to actually, Kay or Jeff, just you're gonna have to monitor. I'm gonna set myself for a timer of about 15 minutes. So
Sounds good.
okay, let me get the it'll be 15 minutes and I'll try to do this. How did this particular, well, I'm not getting my gallery view. Okay, so the one thing we had is we finally gotten some very wonderful people, Juniper, Nokia, to tell me how they wanted to start implementing FlowSpec v2. And we got some feedback, and Donald and I talked about this at with Gunter and Jeff at the last ITF. So for the rest of you, let me bring the history. We did some extensive trying to querying working group and operators on what to do with FlowSpec v1 because there were known implementation problems with it. And the working group basically said we have a use case of only DOS for denial of service, and packet format shouldn't change. So for a new TLV form that we needed to have a new TLV format. We wanted to add user ordering of matches with dependency between matches as an open issue. We were going to discuss that as we got there. Action ordering, what happens when your action failed, and perhaps be able to start using Yang modules. Now, in FlowSpec v2, we are looking at using wide communities. The wide communities is stalled at the AD for a good reason. He wants to have a little drill down on pros and cons of the approach before he takes it to the ISG. So we're hoping we can get that scheduled before ITF so we can unblock wide communities and unblock the RPD processing. Andrew has coding experience as you're starting to find out. So he's sensitive to those issues. So as we are gifted with chairs and people on the chair team G with implementation experience, we will do that. So right now we're getting feedback from the implementation from Nokia and Juniper that the whole V2 spec where we put all the various flow specs is too much to implement at once. The putting it in one place was a good idea because we captured all the ideas and we tried to sort through the issues. Now, I believe in trying to do that, but then if we break it up like we did with the TE policy in two parts, that's a good thing because we've thought it out. Okay, this is ready for complete implementation. This is later. And this may be um, what you all think. And this is the query. Look, if we did a highest priority, people tell me enhanced denial of service, enhanced DDoS, enhanced, and perhaps a simple firewall is important. That requires TLV formats for types, user ordering on matches, and action upgrades, denial of actions, and few more. And what happens if you fail? If if you have 5 actions and you're working on them together, what happens if you fail? Okay, and sometimes you don't care, sometimes you do. So just as a thought, and I will query this on the list, is what happened if we did a part 1 denial of service D2? We take our existing draft and perhaps we leave the existing there as a working group draft and adopt these cutoffs with it, where you did IP matches only. Okay, user ordering on matching, and we talk about as it's significant whether we have any dependency on matches, and that's on matches. The user can always have an ordering of every match. With a large ordering space, they can say, I have 1, I have 2, I have 3, I have 4, as you're ordering. Somewhat what the dependency deals with is the default. Okay, you gave the FlowSpec v2 says, I said user order 1, but you gave me 5 with user order 1. So we give a default matching ordering within that based on something that looks like the FlowSpec v1 spec. Okay, the other question is ranges. So these are things we would deal with the general IP. Let me go on, and then you might then have seems to be duplicated. Then you might have problems with actions. Right now, the suggestion is to stay with the extended community, but do some reformatting. One approach would be to give me 7 bits of assignment so we can expend things out, and a 1-bit failure mode. Stop and roll back or continue on if you have a failure. How would we deal with this with current assignments? We might assign it to make things organal. We might have a new action that says redirect and with this indirection and then traffic rate. I'm trying to make sure we solve the problems short term and long term. The second approach is 5 bits of assignment and take 2 more bits for short ordering. Jeff is worried, and he makes a good point, whether that's really any value versus doing this option. The reporting of status and stuff, which is a thing, would be left to later things. So just think about this, and I'm going to try to be done with what's next so you can give me some opinions privately, publicly, and then I will go to my co-authors and we will try to work on that. We'll probably keep the main draft running and keep the definitions in that the same, because I believe after walking through it that our use of the type field in the general header. What would I do beyond that? I would probably do DDoS plus extended actions, trying to get the IP match, the extended communities and the wide community. I would probably, if I move dependencies out of the first one, move it into the second draft. And then I would have other drafts that go beyond that to firewalls, firewalls for tunnel, and Donald has done a very nice firewalls for tunnels and the NVOT type work already, and that's in a separate draft. And then we'd have another draft on managing. We try to roll people's existing work into what's ever there. Now that's just a thought, spurred on by people saying, I really can't drink this whole draft at once, and IDR has the clear requirement that what's implemented, that to implementation has to have focus on most of the text. Okay, clarification questions. If you're spaced after two times, if you can think about it and send me a note. Any thoughts? Yes, Kali Raj, go ahead.
Hi, Susan. So I was just going through the FSV2 and the list of actions, and it just quickly going over the list. It looks like at least there are like 4 actions that can be folded into the MNH draft, which is also in the adoption queue. So if we implement MNH for any address family, then these redirect to IPv4, redirect to IPv6, redirect to the indirection ID and the MPLS label actions, all of this can be achieved using the MNH. Including the color resolution. So that just
Yes.
just came out with.
Yes, and I think all of it can be. I don't think we have. Thank you for the comment. Jeff, any more Kali Raj? Okay. Jeff, your turn.
Okay, a few things, but hitting a reverse item, since Kali Raj brought it up. So I'm not sure the multi-desktop is probably the right consideration for firewall actions, because I think what you're going to find happens as the flow spec stuff expands, especially as the other use cases that have been on the table for a while move out. There's a lot of types of things that are very intrusive and not really appropriate for IP routing, but are perfectly appropriate firewall type actions. So, well, certainly can have that as a discussion as multi-desktop. I think contaminating the use cases might be a challenging piece of discussion. Moving through other discussion points that happened at that meeting at IETF last that Sue was mentioning, one sort of critical point is, wide communities is listed here as a potential piece of the solution space. What we're looking at, I think, feature-wise that we need out of FlowSpec v2 is more about how do you take sets of actions that need to be bundled together and allow them to be, number one, grouped appropriately so that they represent their dependencies correctly. Pick an easy example out of our existing FlowSpec features that we have. We have a redirect to VRF, we have a redirect IP. When the authors were doing redirect IP, we were trying to figure out how these things combined with each other, and there's text and redirect IP that try to talk about this sort of thing. But we also talked about, as part of that very first effort of how do these features cross interact, what happens when you can't implement them consistently, if they're separate extended community style actions, then you potentially have ambiguities going on in terms of even just signaling, much less how do you program things. So the bundling, the dependencies, and the failure modalities are really the solution that's needed. The encoding, that's whatever. You can go into a wide community container, not specifically the wide community format, or it can go into a brand new path attribute. So that item's not necessarily the holdup, but as Sue's mentioning, as part of the action portion of her slides, just simply addressing that set of things is a longer discussion. Whereas a lot of the things that for FlowSpec v1 was problematic, rule ordering is a default. What do you do if some of the criteria can't be satisfied? And also, as she's mentioning, the default sort orders. One of the properties that FlowSpec v1 had that wasn't really documented, but again, it's sort of built into the document. The sort order is great for denial of service. And the consequence there is that we have rules that are currently ordered 1 through 15, I think, for 8956. And this means that if we start adding on additional match criteria and allow for default sorting, where things potentially hit in the sort order, even though we have the ability to allow users to specify that as part of the packet itself, we want the defaults to make sense. So there may be some need to have a discussion about how we change our numbering space. So those are the broad things. Nothing really scary in here, but definitely big work.
I know we're getting toward the end. If you're implementing this, or if you're planning to deploy this, if you would please let me know if taking this cutback is helpful. FlowSpec was first designed because people needed it. And it seems that it's still a key piece. And I don't want the large spec, which we did to be technically consistent, to make us blocked. Let's just break it into pieces, leaving the original document, and we'll call out pieces. The original document doesn't have to go to RFC. We could take these little pieces and just leave it. And I'd probably ask for an adoption call on all the little pieces. And then once it's adopted, we'll move the rest. So that, anyway, any other thoughts before we close? I know you've been very patient to work through all a very technical discussion today. Any thoughts? Send them to Jeff I or K or whatever you'd like. Okay. Last call. Okay. Action item. Nat, Swadesh, Jeff, and Ketan / Kaliraj, if you would, Nat, Swadesh, and Jeff, if you would send that today, if you haven't sent it, so I can start that. Kaliraj and Ketan, if you can get together and work it and give me a summary by about Wednesday or Thursday, that would be helpful. Thank you all. Have a good day. We'll probably see you in another interim.
Thanks.
Goodbye.
Hi, Jeff. Hi, Donald. Hopefully you'll help me with this once we get some feedback, okay?
Sure.
Thank you so much.